to the ESG Advantage. This session is brought to you by RBC Capital Markets.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining RBC Capital Markets conversation today on Sustainable Advantage. 2020 has been a year of considerable disruption and uncertainty, both in how we live as well as the manner in which we run our businesses. However, one thing is clear. The events of the past year have highlighted the importance and the universal applications of sustainable business practices. At RBC Capital Markets, a key theme for our Sustainable Finance Group is the rise of inclusive capitalism, which underscores the importance of what we think are two major systemic issues in society today: climate change and socioeconomic inclusion, as well as their undeniable interconnectedness. More than ever, asset managers are looking to integrate environmental, social, and governance factors into their decision-making. Governments are looking to access the sustainable finance markets, and corporations across all industries are looking to improve their sustainability performance. At RBC, we are working to help support and advise our clients as they work to achieve their own sustainability ambitions. We are focused on adding value to clients through an ESG lens, and we are proud to be contributing to a healthier planet, a more prosperous economy, and a more inclusive society. Thank you for joining the discussion today. We hope it provides some new insights into how we can all work together to build a more sustainable future.
Good afternoon. I'm Lindsay Patrick, and on behalf of RBC Capital Markets, thank you for joining us for this important conversation on ESG Advantage. The events of 2020 are likely to mark an inflection point in our society, where the corporate and the financial sectors both truly embrace sustainable business practices, not only as the right thing to do, but perhaps more importantly, as a creator of value, a driver of innovation, and as the means to attract and retain the best talent. I'm delighted to be joined by Cathy Zoi, CEO of EVGo, in our conversation today. We got to know Cathy earlier this year when we advised General Motors in their partnership with EVGo to install 2,700 fast chargers across the US with a goal of accelerating electric vehicle adoption. Cathy is leading a company which is building the largest charging network for electric vehicles in the country. But she also brings her extensive policy experience to our discussion in her capacity as the former Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy in the Obama administration. Welcome, Cathy. I'd love to start the conversation with your read of the current political environment, and in particular, how a Biden administration will seek to integrate climate objectives into their policies. With the US likely to rejoin the Paris Agreement and make a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050, we now have global alignment on climate issues amongst the G7. Companies are going to need to pivot their corporate strategies to align with these new climate goals. From your experience working with Joe in the Economic Recovery Act in 2009, we'd love some insights from you on some of the tangible policy initiatives that can be taken and the role of both companies and investors to advance this global agenda.
Well, look, thanks for inviting me to be here, Lindsay. It's great to be a part of this conversation, and thanks to the New York Times DealBook folks for organizing what is clearly a stellar conference all day long. Look, on the political issues and the opportunity ahead of us with President-elect Biden, I had the privilege at the beginning of the Obama administration to work very closely with Joe Biden. He was, you may recall, the sheriff of the Recovery Act at a time when, frankly, the only free capital of investing in the clean energy space or in the energy space at all was government because of the global financial crisis. So what we were able to do was very cleverly and creatively have an ecosystem approach to making investments. We looked across technologies and we used a variety of policy instruments to ignite markets. The more mature technology, the more we could use a tax instrument as opposed to some of the earlier stage technologies. We would have grants for research. Now, what's really important there is there were two core principles. One is we wanted to create jobs with what we were doing, and we were very, very successful. I think the data is that over those years of the Recovery Act, over 900,000 American jobs in energy were created. And the second thing is, and this is very, very important, I think, to this audience, our policies were designed to create a safe haven for private capital. That is, we were leveraging private investment with a little bit of government dollars. So what we would do is, if there were a technology that was near commercial terms but just needed a little bit of bridge funding, that's what the government contribution was, so that the private capital could be de-risked. As we fast forward to today, there are opportunities just like that in front of us. Again, as we're actively pursuing greenhouse gas reductions in the United States and around the world. So again, taking it to my day job and EV fast charging, clearly transportation is electrifying. Clearly, we need to have more charging infrastructure available. But if you're a private company like ours, the EVs aren't yet on the market. So one of the policy instruments that's going to be fantastic in a Biden administration is a public-private partnership to accelerate the deployment of charging infrastructure across America. And that is, as I say, to build a bridge between today, when we have about 1 million electric vehicles on the road in America, and by 2027, we're going to have over 7 million. So that public-private partnership recipe works very, very well. And I think that's what you should expect to see from a Biden administration.
That's very exciting. And we see that as a tool being employed not only in the US, but in countries across the world. And representing the financial sector, what we see right now is a misalignment of the risk capital. As you mentioned, some of these newer technologies are just not at scale yet, where they meet the required thresholds required by financial investors or financial institutions. And yet we are also going to need to pivot our own corporate strategies and our own business models to align to a 2050 net zero emissions future. And we are going to need to rely on that blended concept of blended finance and that public-private partnership in order to do so. I'd love to dive deeper on your partnership with General Motors to add 2,700 new fast chargers in the US over the course of the next 5 years. RBC and our infrastructure team were thrilled to work with General Motors as their financial advisor, but also with you and EVGo on this very unique transaction. Can you describe for us the strategic rationale and how it was a win-win for both companies, please?
Well, yeah, I mean, General Motors is a leader in electrification. I mean, Mary Barra, to her great credit, has an enormous vision. I mean, she's made a commitment to electrify their entire fleet over time. Her phrase being 0, 0, 0, zero emissions, zero congestion. I mean, it's wonderful. And GM is saying that they're going to have over 20 new EV models on the market by 2023. That's just around the corner. I think GM knows in order to sell those cars, and they're going to be great cars. There's no doubt about it. They're going to be fun and comfortable and a variety of options for all different kinds of uses and family sizes. In order to sell those cars, people need to feel comfortable that wherever they go, they're going to be able to charge. And I think that's the genesis of the partnership between General Motors and EVGo. So with General Motors, what we're doing is we're actually tripling the size of our fast charging network. We are, as you mentioned in the intro, we're the largest public fast charging network in the country right now with over 800 locations. We're going to triple that over the next few years, again, to create it in 40 metropolitan areas across America, so that people who are considering buying an EV know that they're going to be able to charge conveniently while they go to the grocery store, while they go to the pharmacy, while they go to the playground with their children. And so we're working really, really closely with the folks at GM to put those fast charging stations where people are going to be anyway.
Such a fantastic transaction, and for both companies, it's really building for the future. And that really is aligned with the principles that we see in ESG, is aligning your business strategy to be future-proof. There is also a growing movement towards stakeholder capitalism, a concept that was embraced by the Business Roundtable, which sought to redefine the purpose of an organization to promote an economy that includes all Americans. So you partner not only with General Motors, but a lot of US companies across many different sectors, effectively helping them to achieve their own ESG or sustainability goals. And I would argue that's a similar role to what we play as a financial institution, providing companies with access to capital, to our clients to help them thrive, to the communities to help them prosper, which are core pillars of our own corporate purpose. I would love to hear your perspectives on business leadership today and how you think corporate America is progressing in this stakeholder-friendly world.
Yeah, I mean, like I welcomed the Business Roundtable's statement on stakeholder capitalism. I loved it, and I think it's an important step and an important commitment. I would say it's in that catchphrase, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. I mean, there are visionary corporate leaders like the ones that EVGo works with across the country that are finding ways to create new products and services that are consistent and consonant with that stakeholder capitalism vision. But I would say they can't do it alone. There's a perfect trifecta. I would say there's a recipe for success there, which is that companies have to make a commitment. Government policies have to create a safe haven for the capital or a requirement that those sorts of goals are met so that companies that are taking a risk or really innovative are not disadvantaged commercially. And then the third part of that is that cultural expectations have to align with those ESG commitments. And it's funny, it's not sequential. It's not like as first you have to get a corporate commitment and then you have to get government policy and then you have to adjust cultural expectations. They are a constantly evolving sort of ecosystem. Sometimes it's cultural expectations that drive corporate leaders. Sometimes it's government policy that drives corporate leaders. Sometimes it's the corporate leaders that go and say to the government, actually, we want to do this. We'd like to have this happen, but we can't be unduly exposed because we still do have a bunch of shareholders that are part of our stakeholder group. So I think, to me, what I'm looking at in terms of corporate leadership, to get back to your question, I'm looking for corporate leaders who are saying, I want the world to be this way. I have a product or a service that I can develop and serve, and I think that the market is going to like it. But in order for me to make sure that I'm doing right by my shareholders and by my society, I have to ensure that government policy supports that sort of investment. So it works together.
It does work together. And, I would think your financial institutions, your shareholders, the insurance companies also need to be part of that equation. And I would love to hear where you think we are right now in that intersection of those three factors, where as business leaders, we should perhaps be pushing a little bit further. And then I also love to extend the conversation a little bit more into some tangible examples of how you're helping grow the ecosystem and helping other large American companies achieve their sustainability goals across different industry verticals.
Well, let me turn to the second part of the question first. Like EVGo, we're by our nature, by our definition, we're in a business that's environmentally sustainable. I mean, electrification of transportation is in no doubt that it helps us address greenhouse gas goals. In the power sector, kind of moved first to it sort of transitioning into the renewable and clean energy space. Transportation was a bit of a laggard. I mean, in 2016, it was the first year in the United States that greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector exceeded those of the power sector. So transportation needs to catch up. But it is now catching up, and companies like EVGo are helping with that, because if there's not charging infrastructure to electrify transportation, then it can't take place. So how we do business, we build charging stations on other people's land. So as I mentioned, we like to build our fast charging stations where people want to shop and are going to be, because they're fast. So fast charging, again, for the folks that don't think about this all the time, a fast charge is sort of somewhere between 10 and 45 minutes, depending on how long you want to stay someplace. So we like to build our stations where people want to be anyway for 10 or 45 minutes. Grocery stores are ideal. So what we end up doing, we don't buy that land. We collaborate with grocery store owners, where we've got partnerships with Kroger and with Safeway and Albertsons and Whole Foods. We are building stations there. Many of those companies love working with us, because charging is an amenity increasingly that their customers want, right? So you go drive up, plug in, go do your shopping and come back out. But secondly, of course, is what we've been mentioning during this whole conversation, their ESG goals. Actually working with companies like EVGo to support electrification of transportation is an important part of those retailers' missions. How other companies are doing, let's talk about the car sector for a second. Again, 15 million people employed in the car sector in the United States. Very big, important sector. It's something like 3% of GDP, or at least it was in 2019. So really important. It is the rare car company now that's not made a commitment to electrify. And that's different. Like, I've been at EVGo for 3 years. I took the reins about about 3 years ago right now. And back then, it was more the exception than the rule that car companies had made announcements to electrify. Now it's the converse. So I think, again, that's being driven by technology opportunities, by having a great product, by economic growth of companies, but also by commitments to ESG.
Yes, absolutely. And commitments not only for the company's operations themselves, but also into their supply chain and the commitments they're making to their customers. And we are increasingly seeing the transportation sector and auto companies in particular accessing the sustainable finance market to their great benefit, both to fund these new technologies and investments they're making, but also as a tangible proof point of how they are truly integrating ESG into their overall business strategy. It's pretty exciting. I'd love to move. We spoke a little bit about the power and utility sector, Cathy, but in addition to your role in pursuing mass adoption of EVs, what are your thoughts or the implications for the electricity grid and the utility sector as a whole? How can we work together across verticals and across the capital markets to facilitate the energy transition?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, my first job at a graduate school a long, long time ago was with an investor-owned utility called PG&E in the Bay Area. And things have changed a lot since then. I mean, the power sector back then, and I would think I was at PG&E when Diablo Canyon, a very large nuclear power plant, was born. And back in those days, it was a power plant was off in the distance, long transmission lines, then serving a local area. Now, the rise of distributed generation, solar, wind, the rise of renewables, the rise of storage, the importance of demand response, the shape of the grid has changed. That's number one. Technologically, things have changed. Second thing is, of course, the climate and environmental imperatives mean that we need to move. We are moving, and we need to move to clean. So there's a phrase that's around the beneficial electrification. As we move away from fossil fuels towards renewables, we ought to electrify everything. So that is a big push that I think utilities are thinking about. That obviously, overlay that with the imperative to electrify transportation. And the utilities, I think this is why we're talking about this, have an outsized role. Obviously, if our vehicles are not going to be moving around on fossil fuels, in the coming decades, then we need to have the utility role is incredibly important. So, what does that all mean? It's about planning. It is about modernizing. It's about working hand in glove. And I can just tell you that at EVGo, when we build a charging station, a four charger charging station in a grocery store parking lot, we work very closely with utilities. We work with them on permitting and on making sure that the local distribution network can handle it, on any service upgrades that are required at that place. We work with them to ensure that the rate design, it recognizes the advantages that charging brings to the grid and doesn't penalize us for any disadvantages. And we work on planning for the future. So we are just incredibly, I think the utilities are very, very important partners with us. And we've had, where we have most of our stations right now are in California, because that's where the EV revolution really started in the United States. We have very, very effective relationships with the largest utilities in California and many across America. So look, they're incredibly important partners. I think most utility CEOs that I speak to are very, very excited about the move, the recognition of beneficial electrification that's economy-wide, and our collaborators as we make that transition into a more modernized electric system.
And a theme that weaves through our discussion, and certainly through my day-to-day job in sustainable finance, is the need for collaboration. We can't solve these complex issues all on our own. And we need to work across industries, across verticals, big companies, small companies, governments, banks together in order to achieve some of these big picture goals. So I'm really grateful you brought that together. I'm going to pivot a little bit, Cathy, because there's more to ESG than just the E, or the environmental considerations. And it might be even more important for renewable energy companies or companies that we say are positively aligned with environmental impact to also show how they are managing the social and the governance factors in their business. And 2020 has shown us as business leaders that we can no longer stand by and tolerate the systemic inequities in our society today. I'd love to hear how you are approaching the S, the social, and the G governance factors within your own business, and some of the tangible measures you are taking to drive equality and inclusion within your own business.
I love this question, Lindsay, and I thanks for asking it. I mean, at EVGo, we've been very, very proud because our business, as I said, at its heart is environmentally friendly. And we were the first, and I think are today the only charging company that's also gone 100% renewable energy. But that is the E. At the time of George Floyd's death earlier this year, at EVGo, we were reeling. Everybody was quite shaken by it. And so we took action. So one of the first thing I did is I undertook a survey of all company employees and said, let's look inward. What can we do? What do we need to do to make a contribution in our own way to addressing the racial injustice that's pervasive and systemic in the United States? We got a wide variety of responses, some very, very terrific suggestions. And out of that, I put them into 6 categories, and we formed 6 task forces. And at the risk of this sounding process-wise, I want to go through them because I think that they're really important. The task forces were co-chaired by a member of the leadership executive, as well as somebody else from the organization. And they dealt with education and training of ourselves on things like unconscious bias and privilege, hiring, recruiting, inclusion in the company, advancement for people of color, community engagement, and electric for all, which is sort of like, how do we actually run our business so that EVs aren't just available for the wealthy, but that we're siting our charging stations in places across the economic and demographic spectrum. And over 70% of the people in the company were engaged in one of those task forces on a voluntary basis and came up with a list of recommendations about, and that has now formed an action plan that is, we all admit, is a work in progress, but we've gotten things underway. So about 3 weeks ago, we did a training by a group of experts their company is called Overcoming Racism, where the entire company, was mandatory, participated in 2 half-day sessions on unconscious bias and privilege. And it was stirring, and some people, I mean, there were tears, there were emotions, but we all came away with a new appreciation of, like, hey, we have a part to play in addressing some of these things. And just across the board, we've identified a charity that provides work for people of color that into our own industry. So where we can, I mean, EVGo is not going to solve this ourselves, but EVGo is trying to do our bit to become better and to become better citizens of this nation and address the systemic racism that I think everybody has seen.
Yeah, and certainly it's come to the forefront. And even for companies where, like ourselves at RBC, where diversity and inclusion is a core value, the events of the summer really did make us all reflect on and acknowledge the fact that systemic racism is part of our society today, and that we all have a role to play in advancing inequities in our society, and to do what we can to address the bias that exists today. And for us at RBC, we took a variety of different tangible measures. One that was personally really important to me was to ensure that we have 40% of our incoming summer students, those positions are open to BIPOC youth. So again, it's that sort of equal opportunity to bring them into the company at the very beginning. And I agree with you. There's so much more to do. It's not something we're going to knock off right at the start, but acknowledging that the practices of the past perhaps had not advanced inequity the way we would have liked to, or advanced equity the way we would like to, I think is a great first step. And thank you for sharing those stories.
Well, and the other thing I guess I would say, and I think you agree with me, is that our companies are going to be stronger for acknowledging the missteps from the past and the injustice of the past, but addressing them. EVGo is going to be a better company if we increase diversity. EVGo is going to be a more effective company commercially if we address these issues, and if we have a more diverse workforce, and we effectively recruit more, and we're engaged in our local communities, and we site our stations in new communities. We're going to be a better, more effective company, and that's what's actually really, really nice about it. It's not an either or.
Yes, and it goes back to a core ESG principle of building for the future, and You're building your company to align with the future. Cathy, I'm so disappointed that we only have a few minutes left, but I have one very cheeky, if I will, question right at the end. And not to generalize, but to dive a little bit deeper on this topic, it has been noted that female leaders are more likely to build SDG or Sustainable Development Goal aligned businesses, as well as take leadership roles in sustainable finance and responsible investing. Curious for your view, does an ESG aligned world provide more opportunities for inclusive leadership, or is inclusive leadership driving a more purpose-driven world?
I think the answer is yes, and that's sort of a cheeky response. I think it is circular, and again, I hate to generalize as well. I mean, I studied science and engineering as an undergrad, and I've been a woman in energy for my entire 30-plus professional career. So I've always been kind of a minority gender-wise in terms of my positions. I've also always been completely committed to sustainability principles. So have been many of my male colleagues, but I do think, I guess I would note that my commitment to it is completely heartfelt, and I do share that with a number of other women leaders. I think at the end of the day, again, what we want is to have broad pro rata, at least representation of men and women, of people of different backgrounds, and that our society is stronger for that, and our economy is stronger for that, our companies are stronger. So and I totally believe that ESG is going to make our companies stronger. So if the way in is because we actually get some more women leaders there that actually are successful, that hopefully within, I don't know, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years at the outside, there will your question would be sort of almost like a quaint question. That like by 2030, that the answer to that question would be like, oh, was there really a time when it was only women who were sort of viewed that way? That seems silly now. Like our executive is sort of half men, half women. And I would say that the male executives at EVGo share the ESG principles as deeply as I do. But that's probably not uniform.
Right. But what do you think? I think that's the definition of inclusive leadership. And I think we're just bringing a different lens to how we're running our businesses and being more inclusive going forward. So the answer is yes to both. And I too, like you, think that ESG will just be part of the conversation across all executive teams over the next 10 years. Cathy, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. We really appreciate your insights, your partnership, and it's been just fantastic to speak with you today. Thank you to the New York Times and to the DealBook Conference for hosting us. And on behalf of RBC Capital Markets, have a lovely evening. Take care.
Thank you.